The moment you stop respecting people, your business is already dying. Vanessa Carter had heard those words from her father years ago, but she never expected to remember them while staring at a piece of bread covered in mold. The Grand Harbor Hotel looked flawless from the outside. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors. A pianist played softly near the restaurant entrance. Guests in tailored suits laughed over expensive dinners while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays. Everything about the place suggested excellence. Everything except the bread sitting on Vanessa's plate. She slowly pulled the slice apart. A patch of green mold stretched across the center. Not small, not hidden, impossible to miss. For a few seconds she simply stared at it. Then she placed the bread back on the plate and raised her hand politely. A restaurant supervisor approached. His name tag read Jason Reed. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform and an expression that suggested he had already decided how this conversation would end. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Vanessa turned the plate slightly toward him. "I believe this bread has mold on it." Jason glanced down. His eyes landed on the green patch for less than a second before he looked back at her. "That does not seem likely." Vanessa remained calm. "You can take a closer look." Jason sighed quietly. Around them, nearby guests began paying attention. Not openly, just enough to listen. He picked up the bread, examined it briefly, then placed it back on the table. "Our kitchen follows strict standards." Vanessa nodded. "I am glad to hear that. Then there is probably some misunderstanding." Vanessa looked at the bread again. "I do not think mold is a misunderstanding." A few people nearby exchanged glances. Jason's smile tightened. He looked at Vanessa's simple jacket hanging on the back of her chair. He noticed her modest luggage near the table. His eyes measured her before returning to her face. Then he leaned slightly closer. "Maybe luxury hotels just are not for everyone." The words landed heavily between them. The nearby conversations stopped. Forks paused in midair. Even the piano seemed quieter. Vanessa felt every eye in the restaurant shift toward her. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. Jason straightened his posture as if he had just settled the matter. But Vanessa did not react the way he expected. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand compensation. She did not threaten anyone. Instead, she folded her napkin neatly and placed it beside the plate. "What is your name?" she asked. Jason blinked. "Excuse me? Your name?" He pointed to the badge already attached to his uniform. "Jason Reed." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Thank you." Something about her calmness seemed to unsettle him. "Why do you need my name?" he asked. Vanessa reached into her handbag and removed a small black notebook. "Because details matter." She wrote something down. Jason watched the movement of her pen. The confidence in his expression faded slightly. Across the room, several employees were now watching openly. Vanessa closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag. Then she looked directly at Jason. "Who manages this restaurant?" For the first time that evening, Jason hesitated before answering. And somewhere deep inside the hotel, a chain of events had already begun that would change every person in that restaurant before the next sunrise. Jason stared at Vanessa for another moment before answering. "The restaurant manager is not available." The response came too quickly, too rehearsed. Vanessa noticed it immediately. "Then who is responsible for food safety tonight?" she asked. Jason shifted his weight. "Our kitchen staff handles that." "Who supervises them?" The question lingered in the air. Several nearby guests continued listening while pretending not to. A businessman slowly lowered his coffee cup. An older couple paused their conversation. Nobody seemed interested in the bread anymore. They were interested in the woman asking questions. Jason forced a smile. "Ma'am, the issue has already been addressed." Vanessa looked down at the plate. The mold had not disappeared. The comment had not disappeared either. "Has it?" she asked softly. Jason glanced toward the kitchen doors as though hoping someone would rescue him from the conversation. Instead, he found himself growing more irritated. "Would you like another basket of bread?" Vanessa shook her head. "No." "Then perhaps a complimentary dessert." "No." Jason folded his arms. "What exactly do you want?" Vanessa's answer came immediately. Accountability. The word seemed to catch him off guard. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere became noticeably quieter. Jason had spent years dealing with complaints. Most guests wanted discounts. Some wanted upgrades. Others simply wanted attention. This felt different. Vanessa was not asking for compensation. She was asking questions. And questions were harder to dismiss. She reached into her handbag again and removed the small notebook. Jason watched as she wrote another line. "You are still taking notes?" he asked. "Yes." "About what?" Vanessa closed the notebook. "Everything." For reasons he could not explain, that answer bothered him. Across the dining room, a young server accidentally made eye contact with Vanessa. The woman quickly looked away. Her reaction was subtle, but Vanessa noticed it. So did Jason. Something was happening beneath the surface of this hotel. Small signs, small reactions, small moments of discomfort. The moldy bread was beginning to feel less like an isolated mistake and more like a symptom. Vanessa looked around the restaurant. Elegant lighting, expensive artwork, perfectly folded napkins. Everything appeared polished. Yet appearances often hid deeper problems. She had learned that lesson years ago. Companies rarely failed because of what everyone could see. They failed because of what nobody wanted to discuss. Jason suddenly straightened as another figure entered the dining room. A tall man in an expensive navy suit walked confidently between the tables. Employees immediately adjusted their posture. Conversations among staff became sharper, more careful. The man's presence changed the room without him saying a single word. Jason's expression relaxed almost instantly. "There he is," he said quietly. Vanessa followed his gaze. The man approached with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years being obeyed. His silver hair was neatly groomed. His shoes reflected the chandelier light. Every detail suggested authority. "Good evening," he said as he reached the table. "I am Daniel Morgan, general manager of the Grand Harbor Hotel." Vanessa offered a polite nod. Daniel's smile appeared professional, friendly even. But his eyes quickly moved from the moldy bread to Vanessa's simple jacket and modest luggage. The assessment lasted only a second. Yet Vanessa saw it happen. The judgment, the assumption, the decision. Daniel sat down across from her without being invited. "I understand there has been a complaint," he said. Vanessa looked at the moldy bread one more time before meeting his gaze. "Yes," she replied, "and I think the bread may be the smallest problem in this building." For the first time that evening, Daniel's smile began to fade. Daniel Morgan leaned back slightly in his chair, studying Vanessa with the same careful expression he used when evaluating difficult situations. The difference was that he was no longer looking at the bread. He was looking at her. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Years of business experience had taught her how quickly people formed opinions. Sometimes it happened in seconds. Sometimes it happened before a single word was spoken. Daniel folded his hands neatly on the table. "That is a serious statement," he said. "Perhaps." Vanessa glanced around the restaurant. "Or perhaps it is an obvious one." Daniel followed her gaze. Guests were eating. Servers were moving between tables. Crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light. Everything appeared normal. "I see a successful hotel," he said. Vanessa nodded. "That is exactly the problem." Daniel frowned slightly. "I am not sure I understand." Vanessa looked toward a nearby table where an elderly guest had been waiting several minutes for assistance. Across the room, another server rushed to help a businessman immediately after he raised a hand. Small moments, easy to overlook, easy to explain away. Yet they continued appearing once she started paying attention. "When problems become normal, people stop seeing them," she said. Daniel's expression tightened. With respect, one unpleasant dining experience does not qualify someone to judge an entire property. Vanessa listened carefully. The words themselves were polite. The message beneath them was not. Jason stood several feet away, watching with obvious relief now that the general manager had taken control of the conversation. Daniel noticed the confidence returning to his employee and seemed pleased by it. "We serve thousands of guests every month," Daniel continued. "Our satisfaction ratings are among the highest in the region." "That is impressive," Vanessa replied. "It is." Daniel smiled slightly. "Which is why I believe this situation has been exaggerated." Vanessa reached into her handbag and removed the small notebook once more. The sight of it immediately caught Daniel's attention. "You seem very attached to that notebook," he said. "I am attached to details." She opened it and reviewed a few notes. Arrival experience. Delayed greeting. Moldy bread. Staff response. Assumptions. Accountability avoided. Daniel watched silently. "You have been writing all evening?" he asked. "Since I arrived." "Why?" Vanessa closed the notebook. "Because culture leaves clues." The answer seemed to frustrate him. Around them, several employees had begun watching openly. The conversation had become the most interesting thing in the restaurant. Daniel looked toward Jason before returning his attention to Vanessa. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" Vanessa answered without hesitation. "I want to know who is responsible for food inspections." Daniel blinked. That was not the answer he expected. "Why?" "Because mold does not appear in 1 hour." The statement landed heavily. Daniel glanced briefly at the bread. For the first time, he seemed genuinely uncertain. Vanessa continued. "If it reached a guest table, something failed long before it reached me." Neither Daniel nor Jason responded immediately. The silence stretched longer than either man wanted. Then Daniel straightened in his chair and forced another professional smile. "I assure you, we will investigate." Vanessa held his gaze. "Will you?" The question lingered between them. Daniel felt something unfamiliar for the first time that evening. Doubt. Not about the bread. About the woman sitting across from him. Because despite her simple appearance, despite her calm voice, despite the fact that she never raised her tone even once, Vanessa Carter seemed completely unafraid of him. And that was beginning to make him uncomfortable. Daniel's smile remained in place, but it no longer looked natural. Vanessa could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was trying to understand her, trying to decide whether she was simply a difficult guest or something else entirely. Most people became emotional when they felt dismissed. Vanessa remained calm. That unsettled him more than any argument could have. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. Employees moved carefully between tables, pretending not to watch. Guests continued eating, yet many of them listened to every word. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket and glanced once more at the bread. "I appreciate your concern," he said, "and I assure you that our team maintains very high standards." Vanessa nodded. "Then you should be concerned too." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "We take every complaint seriously." "Do you?" she asked. The question was simple. The silence afterward was not. Daniel leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Vanessa folded her hands on the table. "I am suggesting that when someone reports a problem, the first response should not be doubt." Jason shifted uncomfortably several feet away. Daniel noticed. So did Vanessa. "You are referring to my supervisor." "I am referring to what happened." Daniel exhaled slowly. "People make mistakes." "Yes. Then perhaps we should allow them the opportunity to correct those mistakes." Vanessa looked directly at him. "Correction begins with acknowledgement." For a moment Daniel said nothing. The conversation was moving somewhere he did not like. Across the dining room, a young server accidentally dropped a spoon. The small metallic sound echoed louder than it should have. Every employee seemed tense. Vanessa noticed something else as well. A hostess near the entrance looked nervous every time Daniel glanced in her direction. A bartender immediately stopped speaking when the manager looked over. Tiny details, tiny reactions, tiny signs of a culture built around avoiding blame rather than solving problems. Daniel finally stood from his chair. I think we have spent enough time discussing this. Vanessa remained seated. Have we? Daniel forced a polite smile. I am prepared to remove the charge for your meal. That is not necessary. Then I can offer a complimentary stay. That is not necessary either. His smile weakened. What would satisfy you? Vanessa answered immediately. Honesty. Daniel looked away for the first time. The answer irritated him because it could not be solved with money. Could not be fixed with a discount. It required something deeper. Something the hotel had apparently stopped practicing. Rain began tapping softly against the massive windows overlooking the city. The warm evening light outside was fading into gray. Vanessa looked toward the glass and watched droplets slide downward. Then she reached into her handbag and removed a document folder. She opened it briefly, reviewed a page, and quietly signed her name at the bottom. Neither Daniel nor Jason could see what the document contained. They only saw her close the folder and place it back inside her bag. Daniel interpreted the action as meaningless. Vanessa knew better. The signature she had just placed on that page would become effective the following morning. Very well, Daniel said. If there is nothing else, I believe this matter is finished. Vanessa slowly rose from her chair. Around the restaurant, employees visibly relaxed. They believed she was finally leaving. They believed they had won. Vanessa looked at Daniel one last time. No, she said quietly. This matter is only beginning. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the lobby while the rain continued falling outside. And neither Daniel nor Jason realized they had just made the worst assumption of their careers. The lobby felt completely different from the restaurant. The tension was quieter here. Hidden beneath polished marble floors, warm lighting, and the constant movement of guests arriving and departing. Vanessa walked slowly across the expansive room carrying her handbag over one shoulder. Rain continued tapping against the towering glass windows overlooking the city streets outside. The fountain in the center of the lobby created a soft rhythm that blended with the distant sound of rolling luggage and muted conversations. To everyone around her, she appeared to be an ordinary traveler ending an unpleasant evening. Vanessa knew otherwise. She stopped near one of the windows and looked out at the rain. Reflections from passing cars stretched across the wet pavement below. Behind her, the hotel continued operating as if nothing had happened. That was often the problem. Systems learned how to survive their own failures. She opened her handbag and removed the same document folder she had signed moments earlier. This time she reviewed the final page carefully. The signature was already there. So was the effective date. Tomorrow. Less than 12 hours remained. Vanessa closed the folder and slipped it back into her bag. A television mounted above the lobby bar displayed a business news channel. Most guests ignored it. A scrolling headline briefly mentioned an upcoming leadership transition at Carter Hospitality Holdings. No names appeared. No details were revealed. Just a short announcement about major changes expected in the morning. Vanessa watched it for a second before looking away. Across the lobby, two employees stood near the front desk speaking quietly. One glanced toward Vanessa and immediately looked away. The other whispered something and both laughed nervously. The reaction did not bother her. It confirmed what she had already suspected. People were paying attention. A young bell attendant approached carrying luggage for an elderly couple. Unlike the staff in the restaurant, his smile appeared genuine. He greeted the couple warmly and wished them a pleasant evening. Vanessa noticed, not because the interaction was extraordinary, because it was sincere. Moments later, a housekeeper passed through the lobby and offered a polite greeting to everyone she encountered. Another small sign, another clue. The hotel was not filled with bad people. The culture simply rewarded the wrong behaviors. That distinction mattered. A security officer approached from the entrance. His posture was professional but hesitant. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. Vanessa smiled politely. "Good evening." The officer glanced toward the restaurant hallway before lowering his voice. "I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Vanessa could hear the sincerity in his tone. "I appreciate that." He nodded. "Some situations are handled better than others." The comment was careful, measured. yet it carried more honesty than anything she had heard all evening from management. "Thank you," Vanessa replied. The officer smiled and returned to his post. Nearby, Daniel Morgan emerged from the restaurant corridor. He immediately noticed Vanessa still standing in the lobby. For a brief moment their eyes met across the room. Daniel looked frustrated. Not angry, frustrated. Because despite his efforts, the conversation had not ended the way he wanted. Vanessa simply offered a polite nod before turning away. She walked toward the elevators without another word. Daniel watched her disappear through the closing elevator doors. He believed the situation was finally behind him. Upstairs, Vanessa entered her suite and placed the folder carefully on the desk beside the window. Tomorrow morning, every senior manager in the company would gather for a leadership meeting. Daniel Morgan expected to meet the new owner. Jason Reed expected another normal day. Neither man understood that the woman they dismissed, doubted, and quietly tried to push aside was already preparing to walk into that room with the authority to change all of their lives. Before sunrise, the city seemed suspended between darkness and light. From the large window of her suite, Vanessa Carter watched the first traces of dawn appear beyond the skyline. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the streets below shining beneath scattered streetlights. Everything felt quiet, calm, the kind of silence that existed only for a few minutes before a new day began. A warm cup of coffee rested in her hands as she stood motionless beside the glass. Behind her, the document folder remained exactly where she had left it on the desk. Next to it sat a company identification badge. The words beneath her photograph reflected softly in the morning light. Sole owner. Vanessa looked at the badge for a moment before turning back toward the city. The title itself never impressed her. Responsibility did. Ownership was not about power. It was about accountability. Last night had reminded her exactly why. Her thoughts drifted back to the restaurant. The moldy bread, Jason's smirk, Daniel's assumptions. Yet what stayed with her most were not the mistakes. It was the reactions, the instinct to dismiss, the refusal to listen, the culture that had quietly taught people that appearances mattered more than facts. Those things were harder to fix than a kitchen problem. Much harder. A soft vibration came from her phone. A message appeared on the screen. "The board is ready for this morning." Vanessa smiled faintly. Another message followed seconds later. "Looking forward to introducing you." She typed a brief response and set the phone down. Then she walked back to the desk. The folder contained the final acquisition documents completed the previous evening. Months of negotiations, years of planning, thousands of decisions, all leading to this morning. She opened the folder one last time and reviewed the signature page. Everything was official now. Everything was final. Vanessa closed the folder and picked up the identification badge. For a moment she studied her reflection in the polished surface. She remembered the first hotel she ever worked in. She remembered being ignored in meetings, having her ideas dismissed, watching talented employees leave because nobody listened to them. Those experiences had shaped her understanding of leadership. Respect was not a reward for status. It was a starting point. At 7:30, she left the suite and entered the hallway. The hotel was already waking up. Housekeepers moved quietly between rooms. Engineers checked equipment. Front desk employees prepared for the morning rush. Most of them had no idea that ownership of the entire company had changed hands. They were simply doing their jobs. Vanessa appreciated that. As she rode the elevator downward, several guests joined her. A businessman checked emails. A family discussed breakfast plans. Nobody recognized her. Nobody paid attention to the woman standing quietly beside them. The elevator doors opened onto the executive conference level. Down the corridor, the largest meeting room in the hotel was already filling with department heads and senior managers. Inside, Daniel Morgan stood near the front greeting executives with confidence. Jason Reed sat along one side of the room representing restaurant operations. Both men appeared relaxed, comfortable, certain. They expected to meet the company's new owner within the hour. Neither realized they had already met her. Vanessa walked slowly toward the conference room carrying only her folder and her badge. The morning sunlight stretched across the hallway floor ahead of her. Every step felt calm, deliberate, and with each step, the assumptions made the night before moved closer to colliding with the truth. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as executives settled into their seats. Coffee cups rested beside presentation folders. Laptops glowed across the polished table. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, morning sunlight spilled across the room, illuminating the skyline beyond. Daniel Morgan stood near the front greeting department heads with the confidence of a man who believed he understood exactly how the day would unfold. Jason Reed sat several chairs away reviewing notes for the restaurant division. Both men appeared relaxed. The previous evening already felt distant. Whatever concerns that guest had raised, they assumed the matter was finished. At precisely 8 o'clock, the room doors opened. The conversations stopped almost immediately. Several executives turned toward the entrance. Then more followed. One by one, heads rotated until the entire room was looking in the same direction. Daniel frowned. For a brief second, he could not understand why. Then he saw her. Vanessa Carter entered carrying the same folder she had held the night before. But everything else was different. She was no longer dressed as a traveler arriving late to a hotel. She wore a tailored executive suit. Around her neck hung a company identification badge. Her posture was calm, confident, familiar with rooms exactly like this one. The silence spread through the conference room like a wave. Daniel felt a sudden knot form in his stomach. Jason stared openly. Neither man moved. Vanessa walked past them without hesitation and approached the front of the room. Standing beside the presentation screen was the chairman of the board. He smiled warmly the moment he saw her. Then he extended his hand. The gesture alone sent a shock through the room. Several executives immediately rose from their seats in greeting. Daniel's confidence vanished. Jason's face lost all color. The chairman waited for the room to settle before speaking. "Thank you all for being here this morning." Nobody interrupted. "Today marks an important moment for our company." He turned toward Vanessa. "As many of you know, ownership of Carter Hospitality Holdings officially transferred this morning." The room remained silent. "It is my privilege to introduce the new sole owner of our company." Daniel's heart began pounding. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew. He simply did not want to believe it. The chairman smiled. "Please welcome Vanessa Carter." For a moment, nobody breathed. Vanessa stepped forward. The large presentation screen behind her illuminated. Her photograph appeared alongside a simple title. Sole owner. The words seemed impossible. Daniel stared at the screen, then at Vanessa, then back at the screen again. Every conversation from the previous evening rushed back into his mind. The moldy bread, the dismissive comments, the assumptions, the notebook. Jason looked physically frozen. Vanessa surveyed the room calmly. Her expression contained no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Somehow that made the moment even more powerful. "Good morning," she said softly. The room remained completely silent. "Last night I visited one of our flagship properties as an ordinary guest." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Daniel lowered his eyes. He knew exactly where this was going. Vanessa placed her notebook on the conference table. The same notebook everyone had ignored. "What I learned concerns me." She opened it. Every page contained observations, names, interactions, decisions, reactions, patterns, culture. Then she looked directly toward Daniel and Jason. Neither man could hold her gaze, because in that moment, they finally understood something they should have realized from the beginning. The woman they dismissed had never needed their approval. She had only been looking for the truth. The silence inside the conference room seemed to stretch forever. Nobody reached for their coffee. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody looked away from Vanessa Carter. The notebook resting in front of her had somehow become the most important object in the room. Every page represented a choice. Every note represented a moment someone believed would never matter. Vanessa allowed the silence to settle before speaking again. Years of leadership had taught her that people listened differently after the truth arrived. "I want everyone to understand something," she said calmly. "This meeting is not about a piece of bread." Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Vanessa continued. "The mold was a symptom. The real issue was everything that happened after it was discovered." Daniel Morgan lowered his eyes. He already knew what she meant. Jason Reed sat motionless. The confidence that had filled his voice the previous evening was completely gone. Vanessa opened the notebook and turned several pages. "I observed hesitation when accountability was needed. I observed assumptions replacing facts. I observed employees who appeared afraid to speak honestly. Most importantly, I observed leaders who were more concerned with protecting appearances than solving problems." Nobody challenged her. Nobody could. The room had become painfully aware that every observation was accurate. Vanessa closed the notebook and folded her hands. "What concerns me is that none of these issues appeared overnight." Her voice remained calm, professional, measured. Cultures do not become unhealthy in a single day. They become unhealthy one ignored warning at a time. The words landed heavily throughout the room. Daniel finally looked up. For the first time since the meeting began, he spoke. "You are right." The admission surprised several people. Daniel took a slow breath. "I should have listened more carefully." Vanessa looked at him without judgment. He continued. "I focused on defending the hotel instead of understanding the problem." The room remained silent. Nobody had ever heard Daniel speak that way before. Jason stared at the table. Then, after several long seconds, he spoke as well. "I made assumptions." His voice sounded smaller than usual. "And I treated a guest unfairly." Vanessa listened. The apology was not dramatic. It was not perfect. But it was honest. That mattered. Many people in the room expected consequences. They expected dismissals, public embarrassment, harsh speeches. Vanessa had seen that approach before. It rarely created lasting change. Fear could force compliance, could not create respect. She stood and slowly walked toward the large windows overlooking the city. Morning sunlight filled the room behind her. "If I wanted revenge," she said quietly, "this would be a very different conversation." Several executives shifted uneasily. Vanessa turned back toward them. "But revenge does not improve companies." Nobody spoke. "Accountability does." She looked directly at Daniel. "You have spent years building this property." He nodded. "Yes. Then I expect you to help rebuild the culture that allowed these problems to exist." Daniel blinked. He had expected punishment. Instead, he had been given responsibility. Vanessa turned toward Jason. "And I expect you to become the kind of leader who listens before judging." Jason nodded immediately. "I will." Vanessa believed him, not because of his words, because of his expression. The lesson had finally reached him. Then she looked around the room at every executive present. The greatest threat to any company is not competition. It is the belief that success excuses complacency. The room remained completely silent. This time the silence felt different, reflective, honest. And for the first time since she walked into the hotel, Vanessa sensed that real change was finally possible. 6 months later, the Grand Harbor Hotel looked almost exactly the same from the outside. The elegant architecture still overlooked the city. The marble floors still reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. Guests still arrived carrying expensive luggage while soft music drifted through the lobby. Yet anyone who spent more than a few minutes inside could feel the difference immediately. The atmosphere had changed. Respect no longer felt selective, felt natural. On a bright Saturday afternoon, a family stepped through the front entrance. Their 2 children stopped near the fountain, staring up at the sparkling water with excitement. A bell attendant greeted them warmly and offered assistance before they even reached the front desk. Nearby, another employee welcomed an elderly couple with the same enthusiasm. No one seemed rushed. No one seemed invisible. High above the lobby, Vanessa Carter stood quietly on a second-floor balcony overlooking the scene below. A cup of coffee rested in her hands. Sunlight streamed through the enormous windows behind her, filling the space with warmth. She watched the movement beneath her without saying a word. Across the lobby, Daniel Morgan was helping a guest resolve a reservation issue. The difference in him was impossible to miss. He listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. Months earlier, he would have focused on defending procedures. Now he focused on understanding people. The change had earned him more respect than any title ever had. In the restaurant, Jason Reed moved between tables speaking with guests. He no longer assumed. He no longer rushed to conclusions. He listened. Sometimes the most important transformations began with a single uncomfortable lesson. Vanessa watched him greet a family entering the dining room. The interaction was simple, polite, genuine, exactly as it should have been. Nearby, a young employee was being trained by a supervisor. Vanessa overheard part of the conversation from above. "Treat every guest with the same respect," the supervisor said. "You never know their story." Vanessa smiled faintly. Those words had become part of the hotel's training program. Not because they sounded good in a handbook, because they were true. The fountain below continued its gentle rhythm. Luggage wheels rolled across marble floors. Guests laughed. Employees greeted people by name. Small moments, small choices. The same kind of choices that had once created problems now created trust instead. Vanessa took a slow sip of coffee and looked toward a framed statement mounted near the lobby entrance. The final line caught the sunlight. "Respect is not earned by status. It is owed to every person." She remembered the notebook that had started everything. It sat in her office now, tucked inside a desk drawer. Not as evidence, not as a warning, as a reminder that culture was built through daily decisions. A reminder that leadership was measured by what happened when nobody important seemed to be watching. Down below, one of the children near the fountain looked up and noticed Vanessa standing on the balcony. The little girl smiled and waved. Vanessa waved back. The child laughed and ran toward her parents. The moment lasted only seconds, but somehow it felt meaningful. Vanessa turned her attention back toward the lobby. The sunlight reflected across the marble floor. Employees moved confidently through the space. Guests looked comfortable, welcome, valued. She stood there quietly listening to the sounds of a hotel finally living up to its own standards. And for the first time since she walked into the restaurant 6 months earlier, there was nothing left to fix. Only something worth protecting.